So after my last video talking about the brand new Glass Animals album, I Fucking Love You, I wanted to go back to the year 2020 and the album that made me love them so much, Dreamland. Because this album to me is probably the greatest of the lockdown era of music and one of the greatest albums of the 21st century as well. I was kind of getting into Glass Animals before this album came out, and then it dropped Prime on the head of when I'd become a fan of them, because I've been told they sounded a bit like Wild Beasts. And I was just blown away. I love this album so much. So let's dive into why Dreamland is so special. So firstly, the zeitgeist. This album kind of came out as the world collapsed. I think I was reading an article written by Dave about how the band was really gearing up for a huge album release circuit just as the pandemic hit, and then obviously March 2020, the whole world turned upside down. And I don't know how many of these songs were actually written around COVID times. I feel like a lot of them might have already been done, but somehow it seems to perfectly capture that fever dream lockdown mood. You think about songs about like sitting at home and stewing in the summer, being caught in your own thoughts, and that's what Dreamland does so well. There's a couple of articles here to check out as well, because for a lot of people, Glass Animals are that pandemic band, maybe the first band that fully blew up from TikTok for a lot of people with Heatwave specifically. There's a great article by Dave Bailey, which he has written for the Independent back in 2021, talking about how COVID changed the way that they related to their fans. Obviously, they did a lockdown concert, live stream with lots of their fans on Zoom, and found ways to connect with their fans even when people weren't going outside. I think about the Dreamland video for this song especially, where Dave is sort of setting up the rig in his room in isolation, which his crew has sent him to pull the camera slowly forwards. But Dave says in this article, under the pressures of the pandemic, people were turning to old music that felt safe and familiar in the same way they were eating pancakes or fish fingers. We were all looking to the past and safety and comfort. I was concerned our new music was well new. The album was my baby. It was the most personal and difficult thing I'd ever written. It came out of a tumultuous writing and recording process that nearly killed me. And there I was, getting prepared for it to be a fart dropped in a hurricane. But in August 2020, it was released and it exceeded all the wildest expectations, because there is a nostalgia to this album. Maybe that was something that COVID brought on. But definitely hearing him talk about watching the streams of Heatwaves unfolding on a screen sitting on the sofa in his pants. It's not the rock star experience you'd expect with a band who've just written one of the biggest songs of the year, but that's the charm of Glass Animals, I think. And yeah, you have this video as well about how lockdown made them creative.
Hello! The Glass Animals have somehow kept going in lockdown.
And this is the thing, they became the lockdown band. There's something about this music that feels so nostalgic and so millennial, because that's the next big point that I want to make. I think this album has two main zeitgeists. There's of course the pandemic, which I've been talking about, and there is also the millennial nostalgia just running through its core. From the imagery used on the album, the references to really obscure old TV shows, it feels like an album that you would see lyrics for on people's MSN Instant Messenger display pages. And when you see the band live, they really brought that aesthetic into their live shows. Everything was bright, everything was pink, everything was neon. You had these crazy signs that said like moon and hotel and pool. And when they were about to go live, the screen behind the projector was a loading bar, which I think is such a neat way of building hype with the album. We've seen with Charlie XCX and Brat, and I said this in my last video, how much difference an aesthetic for an album and the artwork can make. And I think Dreamland just did a brilliant thing in a similar vein to Charlie XCX. It was neon pink, not fluorescent green, but the aesthetic for the whole record was so good. And now the sound. Obviously, the album has a zeitgeist, and it was released at the perfect time to capture people's imaginations with a bit of lockdown yearning and a bit of millennial nostalgia. But the whole sound of this album is so perfect from start to finish. The production is absolutely massive, stadium worthy, and a lot of people I think were waiting to see who the next band to reach that stadium level in the UK after the 1975 were. It feels like The answer to that question is Glass Animals, and this album was the showcase of that. It kind of feels like you're in a retro video game at times. Like when you're listening to Heatwave, it has that bounce. You can almost imagine characters going along the screen on a platformer, something like a Mario going across. You've got Tokyo Drifting, which has that kind of neon 90s, almost racing film quality or racing game quality, and then Denzel Curry hopping on the track so well. And these really pitched up guitars with amazing levels of synthesization that add like a mournful feeling to it all. That's the case on Dreamland, that's the case on Helium. The drums throughout the piece are so cool as well. They feel very hip-hop inspired, they feel very trappy. Heatwaves has got that. I think Space Ghost Coast to Coast feels quite hip-hoppy as well. And then you have that moment with the really quiet and the clicking. I don't even know how to describe the drum sound, or it's like a bone sound in the background of that track when it drops. So the concept is set up perfectly for this album, combining the pandemic and millennial nostalgia. The sound is just gorgeous, layers upon layers of perfect, luscious texture, like a great red velvet cake. And then you have the lyrics, and I think Dave Bailey's lyrics are some of the most charming, fun, and British you could ever possibly hear. I think one of the things I love most about Glass Animals is how strangely out of time their lyrics are for a band whose song was the Gen Z anthem. When Dave Bailey talks about being Northern London's own Flash Gordon, it's like Flash Gordon was a campy sci-fi show from the 1980s. All the people singing that lyric will never have seen Flash Gordon, and so many of them will probably not know what it's about, but Dave is very true to his roots. He was born in 1989, so he's kind of the quintessential 90s kid. He'll have grown up with Game Boy Advance and this era, Friends on TV. Pepsi Blue is referenced as well in the lyrics. Bottles of Pepsi Blue from 2002, referencing Pepsi's limited range product, even though this was an album that really captured the hearts of young people who were born in the 2000s. It's very much an album coded in the 1990s. And I think that kind of duality has served it very well. Playing too much of that GTA, playing too much of that Dr. Dre. I use the PlayStation 2 cover for GTA specifically because it just feels like an album that is from the PS2 era. And clap, clap, you're a clever, clever cookie now. What other artist would ever have a lyric like that? It's so absurdist, it's so idiosyncratic, but it perfectly fits. And on the new album, you've got references to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Douglas Adams, Dave saying, I always shit the bed. This is the charm that Glass Animals have that I think really sets them apart, and especially on this album, really makes it hold such a special place in my heart as someone who recognizes some of the references and allusions that Dave is making, because it's the generation just above me. Like, my older cousin, who was like my big brother growing up, was born in 91, a couple of years after Dave. So these are the kind of things that I associate with seeing him and seeing my friends' older brothers being involved in when I was a kid. I have to give the most special credit to this song. You have a 3-song run on this album. You go from Tokyo Drifting, this big, crazy, catchy anthem with a rap hook. It's like Gorillaz meets neon dream pop. And it transitions into this serene and introspective song called Melon and a Coconut. I really, really hope I get to interview Dave Bailey at some point, because this song presents two voices, the melon and the coconut, and it feels to me like it could be one of two things. Either two voices, the melon and the coconut, having this back and forth about nostalgia and existential crisis, being a creative in the same person's head in lockdown, or it could be a couple living together in lockdown. I could be a stay-at-home G.I. Joe. It's such a mournful and beautiful lyric from Dave. And the theme of domesticity comes up so much in this album, domestic bliss, and this idyllic kind of bubble existence that everyone existed in over the COVID pandemic. And what I love about this song is the two parts that it's split into. You have the first half where Coco says to Melly, I can do this anymore. Everything we're doing just feels fucking cold. Everything we're shooting, that's just fake B-roll. B-sides, killing time filler, that's all. The serious kind of doubt, the creative desperation in the voice here. And then in the second half of the song, you have a response that reassures. the coconut, and some of the most incredible lyrics I think I've ever heard in a song. They might be quite marmitey, but they work so well for me. One day you'll see you're fucking wrong. Sometimes B-sides are the best songs. Sometimes killing time's very fruitful. How important it is to sometimes pause and not put pressure on yourself. Take care of yourself. And COVID was almost a time to do that. I can't hide you from life's horrors. I'm not making you like your father. That's where I think it might be a second voice or a partner. And then the creme de la creme, the pièce de résistance. Too much quinoa on online shopping. Off-white Air Force Ones in boxes. A coconut literally can't wear shoes. And the voice in this song says, even if you could, you wouldn't be able to pull them off. You're not that guy. I don't know. It's beautifully kind of self-deprecating if these are meant to be two voices coming from the same person inside their head. And even from an outside perspective, if it's a second person, a partner, it's just so beautiful. It's so funny. It's so distinctive. And Millennial Coconut, I think, has got to be one of the most underrated songs I've ever heard. And straight after it, we get Your Love Deja Vu, which I mentioned in my last video about Glass Animals, has just this incredible production. This huge, all-encompassing synth in the background. And, you know, as well as the lyrics and the sound of this album, I think Dave Bailey's vocal performance throughout is so perfect on the money. Like, every lyric feels desperate. Every sentence, every verse sounds like his last. It's like he's kind of fighting for his life on these songs. And that level of passion, that level of intensity, it just makes the album feel so captivating and urgent, where a lot of other albums lose you. I never really lose myself in this album. Once I hit play, I'm just completely enraptured in it from Dreamland up to Helium. And this has got to be one of my favorite drops of all time. It's just so full on. It's such an amazing beat switch in this song. The whole like semantic field of this album, the whole language used in this album, maybe in time when we're both better at life, it's like being frozen in time, being caught in that awkward kind of late 20s, early 30s phase where you're not quite a full adult, you're not a child, you're kind of a young adult, and you're being pulled in two directions. It just feels like the perfect summary of bubble of existence that Dave has managed to capture for Dreamland. And running through some of the tracks that I haven't mentioned as well, it's just all hits on this album. Tangerine coming off the back of Dreamland. This is such a beautiful, bouncy and uplifting song. The percussion throughout the album feels so distinctive and so unique from anything else I've heard. The home movie segues that I assume are Dave's own from his childhood seems so perfect as well. 1994, BTX, Rockets. You don't even really notice that they're tracks in themselves because they tack so perfectly onto the end of the track that they follow and the start of the track that they lead into. Tokyo Drifting, I've heard some people say they don't like this song, but the drop is so hard. It's such an amped up track. And I remember on one of my birthdays, I think in 2022, just cruising around Birmingham on an electric scooter, listening to Tokyo Drifting, and it was such a main character moment. This song makes you feel like you're Dom Toretto in Fast and the Furious, and I think that's exactly the kind of pantomime G.I. Joe energy that Dave was trying to create with this track. Towards the end of the album, you have the more kind of pensive and then dramatic tracks. Waterfalls coming out your mouth, and it's also incredibly loud, building up to a crescendo. It feels weirdly like Kid A inspired. And I know Dave is a big fan of Radiohead. Glass Animals actually come from Oxford, the same as Radiohead. And there's a few nods here and there, like the video for Agnes, I know for a fact, is inspired by the No Surprises video. Dave confirmed it very briefly when I managed to sneakily ask him the question in a Discord AMA with Glass Animals last year. You come up to track 14, and that's the crazy thing about this album. Heat Waves has 3 billion streams. But if you listen to this album without knowing that, it's just kind of tucked up at the end of the album. And for all people talk about that song and Glass Animals and how they lean on it, I think that's totally unjustified because it is not the headline in this album. It's actually kind of in there at the end as a nice, smooth, late night summer kind of mournful number. It's so funny that it's become this crazy hit song that is known by so many people who don't even know who Glass Animals are, when on this album, it's kind of like a pre-epilogue moment rather than the front and center spotlight moment. And finally, Helium is just such a perfect closing track. The way that the guitar is kind of pitched up in this one, it feels kind of beautifully distant and mournful. It's just how you want to close an album. And when Dave is calling out, I guess I want you more than I thought I did, it feels like the end credits are about to roll. So the overall thoughts, why is Dreamland such a special album? I guess everyone probably has a different answer to the question, but it's probably to do with experience, because this album came out at a time where it could really anchor itself to the memories and experiences of a lot of people going through a very challenging time. It was COVID, it was lockdown. There was a sense of uncertainty about what was ahead of us and a sense of yearning and nostalgia for the past, but also a sense of displacement. We were all in our bubbles. I remember really vividly living on the 13th floor of a Birmingham city centre apartment, looking out on the horizon, being kind of in this bubble above so many people who I could see outside and feeling completely isolated. And I listened to Helium a lot of times looking out the window. I listened to Melon and Coconut a lot of times just looking in the mirror and thinking about being in my own head, being with my own thoughts. Dreamland was an album for that era, and it's got such a heartfelt and unpresumptuous style of writing. I think it really pisses me off to see people like Anthony Fantano dunking on this album when it's the least pretentious thing ever. It's just a fun, tongue-in-cheek, incredible synth-pop album with playful lyrics, incredible instrumentals, and one of the most amazing Gorillaz-esque rap features on an alternative album you'll ever hear anywhere. So I will always call Dreamland a classic 10 out of 10 album till my dying breath. So let me know in the comments, guys, what Dreamland means to you, if you share my love of this album and why you especially think it is such an effective album. If you would like to see me react to any other albums, whether by Glass Animals or other artists, let me know. And also, my YouTube channel is fully monetized now, so if you like this video and want to help me make more like it, you can subscribe to the channel firstly and give this video a like, but also become a channel member from only $2.99 a month, which would be amazing, and big love if you want to do that. You get access to loads of cool perks and badges. I'll see you guys in the next video, and do me a favor, listen to Dreamland one more time tonight, and then check out the new album, I Fucking Love You So Much, as well, because there's a lot of gems on there that aren't to be missed, and will remind you why Dreamland is such a great album as well.